The mahogany conference table gleamed under the crystal chandelier as Elena Moreau quietly slipped into the leather chair at the far end, her modest cardigan a stark contrast to the designer suits surrounding her. The 23rd floor of Blackwell and Associates commanded a breathtaking view of the city skyline, where glass towers reached toward gray autumn clouds like monuments to wealth and power. She wondered if viewers watching from places like Chicago or Miami had ever sat in rooms like this, where millions of dollars changed hands with casual signatures and family fortunes hung in the balance of quarterly reports. Theodore Blackwell, her father-in-law, dominated the head of the table with his imposing frame and silver hair that spoke of old money and older privilege. His son Garrett sat to his right, adjusting his Harvard tie clip with the practiced smugness of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. Vincent, Elena's husband of 8 years, occupied the chair beside his brother, his nervous energy barely contained as he shuffled through documents with hands that trembled slightly. The family investment meeting had been scheduled for months, but Elena still felt like an intruder in this temple of financial sophistication. Vivian Blackwell Sterling, Theodore's daughter, swept into the room with the confidence that came from managing her own boutique investment firm. Her Hermes bag landed on the table with casual authority as she surveyed the assembled family members with cool calculation. She barely acknowledged Elena's presence, her gaze sliding past her sister-in-law, as if she were invisible furniture. Theodore cleared his throat, commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. The quarterly family wealth management review would determine how their diversified portfolio of real estate, technology investments, and international holdings would be restructured for the coming year. Elena pulled out her worn notebook, the same one she had used for years to track market trends and economic indicators, its pages filled with her careful handwriting and detailed analyses. The first snicker came from Garrett when he noticed her simple spiral-bound notebook among the iPads and leather portfolios scattered across the polished surface. "Elena," he said with barely concealed amusement, "are you planning to take minutes for us?" His voice carried the particular condescension reserved for those he considered beneath his notice, each word carefully enunciated to maximize its cutting effect. Vincent shifted uncomfortably in his seat, torn between defending his wife and maintaining his standing with the family power structure that controlled his trust fund and business opportunities. Theodore's stern gaze swept the room before settling on Elena with the kind of patience one might show a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. Vivian leaned back in her chair, her manicured fingers drumming against the table surface. "I have to ask," she said with false sweetness, "why exactly are we including someone without any formal business education and strategic financial planning?" Her question hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, poisoning the atmosphere with its casual cruelty. The comment struck its intended target with surgical precision. Elena's lack of a college degree had been a source of family commentary since the day she married Vincent, whispered about at dinner parties and family gatherings like a shameful secret that somehow reflected poorly on their entire bloodline. She had left high school at 17 to care for her dying mother, working multiple jobs to pay medical bills while her peers attended graduation ceremonies and college orientations. Garrett seized the opening with predatory enthusiasm. "Well, Theodore, maybe Elena can share her insights from her extensive experience in the food service industry." His laugh was sharp and brittle, designed to wound rather than amuse. "I'm sure flipping burgers provides valuable perspective on international currency fluctuations and emerging market dynamics." The cruelty in his voice made Vincent wince visibly, but he remained silent as his brother continued the assault. Elena felt the familiar burning sensation in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced countless times over the years when family conversations turned to education, career achievements, or intellectual accomplishments. She was always the outsider, the one without credentials or pedigree, tolerated but never truly accepted. Theodore nodded approvingly at his son's comment before turning his attention to the financial reports spread before him. The family's portfolio had shown concerning volatility over the past quarter, with several key investments underperforming market expectations. Their technology sector holdings had experienced unexpected losses, while their real estate investments faced pressure from rising interest rates and shifting market dynamics. As the discussion turned to specific investment strategies, Elena found herself listening with growing alarm to the proposals being discussed. Garrett enthusiastically advocated for doubling down on speculative cryptocurrency ventures, while Vivian pushed for increased exposure to luxury retail stocks despite obvious signs of consumer spending slowdowns. Theodore nodded approvingly at their suggestions, impressed by their confident presentation and sophisticated financial terminology. Elena raised her hand tentatively, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. "Excuse me, but have you considered the correlation between current inflation indicators and consumer discretionary spending patterns?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them, months of careful observation and analysis compressed into a single, desperate attempt to contribute meaningfully to the conversation. The silence that followed was deafening. Theodore's eyebrows rose slowly, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to barely controlled anger. Vivian's laugh was like breaking glass, sharp and dangerous in its intensity. Vincent's face flushed red with embarrassment as his family stared at his presumptuous wife with undisguised contempt. "Correlation," Garrett repeated slowly, as if the word tasted bad in his mouth. "Elena, sweetie, these are complex financial instruments that require years of specialized education to understand properly." His tone was patronizing in the extreme, each syllable dripping with condescension designed to put her firmly back in her place. Theodore's voice cut through the tension like a blade when he finally spoke. "Elena, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but perhaps it would be better if you simply observed today. These decisions require expertise that comes from formal training and professional experience, not intuition or guesswork from someone who never finished her basic education." The dismissal was complete and crushing, delivered with the casual brutality that only comes from absolute certainty in one's superiority. Elena felt her face burn with humiliation as she sank back into her chair, her notebook suddenly feeling heavy in her hands. The careful research she had conducted, the market analyses she had prepared, the economic indicators she had been tracking for months, all of it rendered meaningless by her lack of formal credentials. Vincent reached over and patted her hand in what was meant to be a comforting gesture, but his touch felt more like an apology for her existence than genuine support. She could see the shame in his eyes, the embarrassment of being married to someone his family considered intellectually inadequate for their sophisticated financial discussions. As the meeting continued without her input, Elena continued taking her meticulous notes, documenting every proposal, every decision, every confident prediction made by the credentialed experts surrounding her. Her handwriting remained steady despite her inner turmoil, years of practice allowing her to maintain her composure even as her heart broke with each dismissive comment and patronizing smile. The numbers didn't lie, even if the people interpreting them did. 2 weeks after the disastrous family meeting, Elena received an elegantly embossed invitation to Sunday dinner at the Blackwell estate. The thick cardstock felt expensive between her fingers as she read the formal script requesting her presence for what Theodore had termed a family policy discussion. Vincent assured her it was just routine family business, but the tight set of his jaw suggested otherwise. The Blackwell mansion rose from manicured grounds like something from a different era, its Georgian columns and sprawling wings speaking of generations' accumulated wealth. Elena smoothed her simple black dress as they approached the imposing front entrance, knowing that even her best outfit would pale in comparison to the designer ensembles waiting inside. The October evening carried a crisp bite that seemed to seep through her modest wool coat. Dinner was served in the formal dining room beneath oil paintings of long-dead Blackwell patriarchs who gazed down with expressions of permanent disapproval. Crystal glasses caught the light from the enormous chandelier, while silver serving pieces gleamed against pristine white linens. Elena took her usual seat at the far end of the table, positioned like an afterthought between the children's table and the adult conversation. Theodore rose with ceremonial gravity once the main course had been cleared away, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. He announced that recent market volatility had prompted the family to implement new governance structures for their investment decisions. Going forward, all family members participating in financial planning would need to demonstrate proper educational credentials and professional qualifications. The new policy required either an MBA from a top-tier university or demonstrable professional experience in financial management. Family members without appropriate credentials would be excluded from investment meetings and strategic planning sessions. Their voting rights in family trust decisions would be suspended until they could prove their competence through formal education or certified professional development. Elena felt the words hit her like physical blows, each carefully chosen phrase designed to exclude her while maintaining the veneer of objective policymaking. Vincent shifted uncomfortably beside her, but said nothing as his father outlined the specific requirements that would effectively banish her from any meaningful family business participation. Vivian smiled with barely contained satisfaction as she raised her wine glass in mock celebration. Finally, she declared, some rational standards for family financial governance. We can't afford to have unqualified opinions influencing decisions that affect generations of accumulated wealth. Her eyes found Elena's across the table with predatory intensity. Garrett nodded enthusiastically, his Harvard MBA suddenly feeling even more valuable in the new hierarchy being established. Theodore, this is exactly the kind of professional approach our portfolio needs. We're dealing with complex derivatives, international currency hedging, and sophisticated risk management strategies that require real expertise. Vincent finally found his voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. Father, Elena has always been helpful with the family finances. She has excellent instincts about market trends and economic patterns. His defense felt half-hearted even to his own ears, undermined by years of conditioning to defer to his father's judgment. Theodore's laugh was cold and dismissive. Vincent, instincts and intuition are luxuries we cannot afford in serious financial management. Your wife may be intelligent, but intelligence without proper education is like having a race car without knowing how to drive. Dangerous and ultimately destructive. The comparison stung with its casual cruelty, reducing years of careful study and observation to mere guesswork from an unqualified amateur. Elena felt tears threatening but forced them back, unwilling to give the family the satisfaction of seeing her break down completely. As coffee was served in the library, the conversation turned to specific investment opportunities that the newly credentialed family council would pursue. Garrett had identified several promising technology startups that reminded him of early Amazon or Google investments. His contacts from business school were offering exclusive access to pre-IPO shares in companies developing artificial intelligence and blockchain solutions. Vivian enthusiastically supported expanding their European real estate holdings, particularly luxury properties in London and Paris that would benefit from post-pandemic recovery trends. She had insider information from her investment firm about upcoming development projects that would drive significant appreciation in select neighborhoods. Theodore listened approvingly to their proposals, impressed by their sophisticated analysis and confident projections. The family would liquidate their conservative bond holdings and traditional blue-chip stocks to fund these more aggressive growth strategies. They would leverage their existing real estate portfolio to increase their buying power and maximize potential returns. Elena listened with growing horror as the family outlined investment strategies that ignored fundamental market warning signs she had been tracking for months. Interest rate indicators suggested imminent Federal Reserve policy changes that would devastate over-leveraged real estate investments. Technology sector valuations had reached unsustainable levels that historically preceded major corrections. She cleared her throat softly, attempting once more to contribute to the discussion despite the new policies designed to silence her. Excuse me, but I've been reading about semiconductor supply chain disruptions that might affect technology stock valuations. Perhaps we should consider some defensive positioning before committing to aggressive growth strategies. The silence that followed was even more crushing than before. Garrett's expression shifted from polite attention to barely contained irritation. Elena, we just explained that these discussions require professional expertise. Your reading of popular financial magazines doesn't qualify you to second-guess sophisticated investment analysis. Vivian's voice dripped with false sympathy when she spoke. Sweetie, we appreciate your concern, but you're simply not equipped to understand the complexities we're dealing with here. These aren't decisions you can make based on newspaper articles and television financial shows. Vincent's face flushed red with embarrassment as his family stared at his presumptuous wife, with undisguised contempt. Elena, perhaps you should focus on areas where your talents are better suited. Planning the holiday entertaining schedule or managing household expenses. The dismissal was complete and humiliating, delivered with the casual brutality that had become the family's standard response to her attempts at participation. Elena felt her face burn as she realized that her own husband had joined the systematic campaign to exclude her from any meaningful family decision-making. Theodore nodded approvingly at his son's comment before returning attention to the investment proposals that would reshape the family fortune. The evening concluded with handshakes and confident predictions about the wealth generation that would result from their bold new strategy. Family members departed with satisfaction evident in their bearing, convinced they had implemented rational governance and exciting investment opportunities. Elena spent the drive home in silence, her notebook heavy with details about decisions that contradicted everything she understood about prudent financial management. The family had committed to leveraging themselves dangerously while pursuing investments at valuation peaks that suggested imminent correction. Their confidence was absolute, but their reasoning ignored fundamental economic indicators that had proven reliable for decades. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself effectively exiled from family business discussions. Investment meetings were scheduled without her knowledge, while financial updates were shared through Vincent in summary form that excluded detailed analysis or strategic reasoning. She was treated like a child who might be upset by adult conversations about money and planning. The exclusion extended beyond formal meetings to casual family gatherings where financial topics dominated conversation. Dinner parties became exercises in intellectual humiliation as credentialed family members discussed market strategies, while Elena was relegated to conversations about recipes and household management with spouses who lacked business interests. Garrett took particular pleasure in explaining sophisticated financial concepts to other family members while pointedly ignoring Elena's presence. His MBA vocabulary became a weapon of exclusion, deployed with surgical precision to remind everyone of the educational hierarchy that governed family participation. He spoke of beta coefficients and alpha generation with the smugness of someone who had never been wrong about anything important. Vincent grew increasingly uncomfortable with the systematic exclusion of his wife, but his protests became weaker and less frequent as family pressure mounted. He found himself choosing sides repeatedly, and Elena was painfully aware that she was losing those battles with increasing regularity. The family's investment portfolio shifted dramatically as they implemented their aggressive new strategy. Traditional holdings were liquidated to fund speculative technology investments and leveraged real estate acquisitions. Their risk profile transformed from conservative wealth preservation to aggressive growth seeking that would have made professional financial advisors nervous. Elena continued documenting every decision in her worn notebook, tracking the specific investments and leverage ratios that the newly credentialed family council pursued with such confidence. Her research into market conditions intensified as she watched the family commit resources to strategies that contradicted every warning sign she had learned to recognize over years of careful study. Warning signals were emerging across multiple market sectors that suggested the family's timing was catastrophically poor. Technology valuations had reached levels that historically preceded major corrections, while real estate markets showed signs of speculation that echoed patterns from previous bubble periods. Interest rate indicators suggested Federal Reserve policy changes that would devastate over-leveraged investments. But Elena's voice had been systematically silenced through policies designed to exclude anyone without formal credentials from financial discussions. Her insights were dismissed as uninformed speculation from someone who lacked the education necessary to understand sophisticated investment strategies. The family's confidence in their credentialed expertise was absolute and unshakable. The stage was set for a financial disaster that Elena could see approaching with mathematical precision, but was powerless to prevent through her exclusion from family decision-making processes. Her notebook filled with increasingly detailed analysis of the warning signs that the credentialed experts were ignoring in their pursuit of aggressive returns. The first cracks appeared on a Tuesday morning in November when Garrett's phone rang during his morning coffee. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway as his confident expression dissolved into confusion, then alarm. as his technology portfolio manager delivered news that would shatter the family's carefully constructed financial confidence. The artificial intelligence startup that had consumed 40% of their aggressive growth allocation had announced bankruptcy overnight, its revolutionary algorithms proving to be sophisticated versions of existing software. Vincent emerged from his home office pale and shaken, clutching printed reports that showed their European real estate investments hemorrhaging value as interest rate increases triggered widespread market corrections. The luxury London properties that Vivian had championed were losing equity faster than anyone had thought possible, while their leveraged positions amplified every percentage point of decline into devastating losses. Elena continued preparing breakfast with steady hands while chaos erupted around her, measuring coffee grounds with the same careful precision she applied to tracking market indicators. Her notebook lay open beside the morning newspapers, filled with analysis that had predicted exactly these scenarios months before they materialized. The semiconductor supply chain disruptions she had mentioned were triggering the technology sector correction she had warned about, but no one had wanted to listen to warnings from someone without proper credentials. Theodore's voice carried through the phone speakers as he demanded explanations from financial advisors who seemed as bewildered as his family. The conservative bond portfolio they had liquidated would have provided stability during the current market turmoil, while their aggressive growth strategy had positioned them perfectly to maximize losses during the correction that Elena had seen approaching with mathematical precision. Garrett paced frantically between phone calls to his Harvard Business School contacts, seeking insight into how their supposedly foolproof investment strategies had failed so spectacularly. His MBA vocabulary became increasingly desperate as he struggled to explain market movements that contradicted everything he had learned about modern portfolio theory and efficient market hypothesis. The confidence that had carried him through months of condescending explanations to family members was evaporating with each percentage point of portfolio decline. Vivian arrived at the family estate within an hour of the market opening, her usually pristine appearance disheveled and her designer handbag clutched like a shield against the financial storm engulfing their carefully planned investment strategy. Her boutique investment firm was facing margin calls on leverage positions that had seemed conservative just days earlier, while her European real estate contacts were reporting panic selling across luxury markets. The family gathered in Theodore's study like survivors of a shipwreck, surrounded by financial reports that documented the systematic destruction of wealth they had accumulated over generations. Computer screens displayed portfolio values that seemed to decline with each refresh, while news headlines announced the exact market developments that Elena had been predicting for months through her careful analysis of economic indicators. Elena entered quietly with a tray of coffee and pastries, her presence barely acknowledged by family members too absorbed in their financial crisis to maintain their usual patterns of dismissive superiority. She set the refreshments on Theodore's massive desk and retreated to a chair near the window, her notebook balanced on her lap, as she continued documenting the unfolding disaster with clinical precision. Theodore's voice was hoarse from hours of conference calls with financial advisors who seemed incapable of explaining how their sophisticated strategies had failed so completely. The technology investments had lost 60% of their value in 2 weeks, while the leveraged real estate positions were generating margin calls that threatened to force additional liquidation at the worst possible time. Vincent attempted to contact portfolio managers who had marketed the failing investments with such confidence, only to discover that many were no longer returning calls or had left their firms entirely. The exclusive pre-IPO opportunities that Garrett had secured through his business school network were proving to be worthless paper backed by companies with no viable business models. Elena cleared her throat softly, her voice barely audible above the frantic phone conversations and panicked planning that filled the room. "Excuse me, but I've been tracking currency correlation patterns that suggest the European losses might accelerate if the Federal Reserve continues their policy trajectory. Perhaps we should consider protective hedging strategies before the position deteriorates further." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a forgotten cigarette, acknowledged by no one despite its obvious relevance to their current crisis. Garrett continued his desperate attempts to contact business school professors who might explain how market fundamentals had diverged so dramatically from academic theory, while Vivian scrolled through her phone seeking insight from investment industry contacts who were experiencing similar disasters. Elena tried again, her voice slightly stronger but still respectful in its delivery. The semiconductor disruption I mentioned is spreading through supply chains in ways that suggest broader technology correction. If we could shift some remaining liquid assets into defensive sectors before the correlation effects intensify, we might preserve some capital for eventual recovery positioning. Theodore looked up from his computer screen with eyes that blazed with frustration and barely controlled panic. Elena, this is not the time for amateur speculation. We're dealing with sophisticated market dynamics that require professional analysis, not guesswork from someone who doesn't understand the complexities involved in institutional portfolio management. The dismissal was automatic and vicious, delivered with the same condescending authority that had silenced Elena's warnings for months. But something had changed in the dynamic of the room, a subtle shift that spoke of eroding confidence and growing desperation among the credentialed experts who had designed the failing strategy. Vivian's voice cracked slightly as she announced that her boutique investment firm was suspending client redemptions due to liquidity constraints caused by leveraged positions in markets experiencing unprecedented volatility. Her sophisticated risk management models had failed to account for correlation effects that were amplifying losses across seemingly unrelated asset classes. Elena's notebook contained detailed analysis of exactly these correlation patterns, tracked through months of careful research into market behavior during periods of monetary policy transition. Her warnings about Federal Reserve rate trajectory had been dismissed as uninformed speculation from someone who lacked formal training in macroeconomic analysis, but her predictions were proving accurate with devastating precision. Garrett's phone rang again with news that the blockchain technology investments he had championed were facing regulatory scrutiny that would effectively eliminate their market value overnight. Government agencies were announcing investigations into cryptocurrency-related businesses that had attracted excessive speculation during the recent bubble period, exactly the kind of regulatory risk that Elena had researched and documented in her analysis. The family's financial advisors were recommending emergency liquidation of remaining volatile positions to preserve capital, but their suggested timing would lock in maximum losses at the worst possible moment. Elena's research suggested that specific defensive positioning could preserve wealth during the correction while maintaining upside exposure for eventual recovery, but her insights remained unwelcome despite mounting evidence of their accuracy. Vincent slumped in his chair as mortgage statements arrived showing that their leveraged real estate investments were approaching underwater status faster than anyone had considered possible. The properties that Vivian had identified as sure appreciation plays were declining in value, while carrying costs accelerated through rising interest rates and increased maintenance expenses in deteriorating market conditions. Elena continued taking meticulous notes as the family crisis deepened, documenting decision points and strategic options with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized her market analysis for years. Her notebook filled with alternative approaches that could minimize additional damage while positioning for eventual recovery, but her voice remained systematically excluded from family decision-making processes. Theodore announced that emergency family meetings would be scheduled daily until the portfolio stabilized, though none of the credentialed experts seemed capable of explaining when or how such stabilization might occur. Their sophisticated financial models had failed to predict the market correction that Elena had seen approaching months in advance through her analysis of fundamental economic indicators. The irony was bitter and inescapable. The family had excluded Elena from financial decisions because she lacked formal credentials and proper education, but their credentialed expertise was proving worthless against market realities that Elena had understood with remarkable accuracy. Her warnings had been dismissed as uninformed speculation, while their sophisticated strategies were destroying generations of accumulated wealth with mathematical precision. As evening approached and portfolio losses mounted beyond anyone's worst-case projections, Elena quietly closed her notebook and prepared to leave the family to their crisis management without her unauthorized input. The numbers told a clear story of systematic failure by credentialed experts who had ignored fundamental warning signs that any careful observer could have recognized months in advance. Her excluded voice had tried to warn them, but educational hierarchy had proven more important than actual understanding. Now the family would face the consequences of their arrogant dismissal of insights that could have preserved their wealth and dignity if they had possessed the humility to listen to wisdom regardless of its formal packaging. The market would continue its correction according to fundamental principles that Elena understood better than anyone else in the room, but she remained systematically silenced by policies designed to exclude voices that lacked appropriate credentials. The tragic irony was becoming impossible to ignore, even for a family whose pride had blinded them to inconvenient truths delivered by unauthorized messengers. The certified letter arrived on a December morning when frost still clung to the windows of the Blackwell estate. Its official seal and heavyweight paper announcing trouble with bureaucratic formality. Theodore's hands shook slightly as he tore open the envelope, his face growing pale as he read the legal language that would transform their financial crisis into something far more dangerous and permanent. Harrison, Claiborne and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious litigation firms, was representing a class of investors who claimed the Blackwell family had breached their fiduciary duties through negligent wealth management and reckless investment strategies. The lawsuit alleged that the family had misrepresented their expertise and qualifications while making investment decisions that violated basic standards of prudent financial stewardship. Elena read the legal documents over Vincent's shoulder in their kitchen, her coffee growing cold as she absorbed the serious nature of the accusations being leveled against the family. The plaintiffs included pension funds, charitable organizations, and individual investors who had entrusted significant assets to Blackwell Family Management based on representations about their sophisticated financial expertise and conservative wealth preservation strategies. The lawsuit alleged that the family had systematically misrepresented their qualifications and experience while pursuing high-risk investment strategies that contradicted their stated conservative approach. Specific accusations included failure to conduct proper due diligence, ignoring fundamental risk management principles, and making investment decisions based on speculation rather than rigorous financial analysis. Vincent paced frantically around their modest apartment, reading passages aloud that accused his family of gross negligence and possible fraud in their handling of investor assets. The plaintiffs were seeking not only recovery of losses, but punitive damages that could exceed the family's remaining liquid assets and potentially force liquidation of their primary residences and business holdings. Theodore convened an emergency family meeting within hours of receiving the legal documents, his usual commanding presence replaced by barely controlled panic as he outlined the severity of their situation. The family would need to hire the most expensive criminal defense attorneys available, while simultaneously preserving enough liquid assets to fund their legal strategy through what could become years of litigation. Elena accompanied Vincent to the estate meeting despite her usual exclusion from family business discussions, her presence tolerated only because the legal crisis had temporarily suspended normal family hierarchies. She carried her worn notebook, as always, filled with months of detailed documentation about the investment decisions that were now the subject of federal legal scrutiny. Arthur Pemberton from Blackstone Defense Counsel commanded the family's attention with the authority of someone who specialized in defending wealthy clients against criminal prosecution and civil litigation. His reputation for aggressive defense strategies came at a cost of $1,500 per hour, plus expenses that could easily exceed the legal fees in complex financial cases. Pemberton explained that the prosecution would focus on demonstrating that the family lacked the expertise necessary to manage investor assets responsibly, while making investment decisions that violated fundamental fiduciary standards. The government's case would rely heavily on documenting the decision-making process that led to such catastrophic losses in such a short period of time. The family would need to demonstrate that their investment strategy was based on sophisticated analysis and reasonable market projections rather than speculation or negligence. They would need detailed documentation of their research methodology, risk assessment procedures, and decision-making protocols to counter accusations of professional incompetence and fiduciary breach. Elena felt a chill of recognition as Pemberton outlined the documentation requirements that would be essential for mounting an effective defense. The prosecution would demand detailed records of every investment decision, including the research and analysis that supported each allocation choice and risk management strategy. Garrett's face drained of color as he realized that most of their investment decisions had been based on informal conversations and business school contacts rather than the kind of rigorous documentation that would survive legal scrutiny. His Harvard MBA suddenly felt worthless against requirements for detailed financial analysis and systematic decision-making records. Vivian admitted that her boutique investment firm maintained only minimal documentation of their decision-making process, relying instead on professional relationships and industry reputation rather than the kind of detailed analytical records that criminal defense would require. Her sophisticated financial vocabulary would mean nothing without documented evidence of proper due diligence and risk assessment. Theodore's voice was hoarse as he acknowledged that the family had maintained only basic records of their investment transactions without the detailed analytical documentation that would be necessary to defend against accusations of negligent wealth management. Their confidence in their own expertise had eliminated the careful record-keeping that would now be essential for avoiding criminal prosecution. Pemberton's expression grew increasingly grim as he realized that his clients had virtually no documentation to support their investment decisions beyond basic transaction records and broker confirmations. The prosecution would easily demonstrate that the family had made multi-million-dollar investment decisions without proper research, analysis, or risk management protocols. Elena cleared her throat softly, her voice barely audible in the tense atmosphere that filled Theodore's study. "Excuse me, but I've been keeping detailed records of market conditions and investment decision-making for several months. My notebook contains analysis of the research and reasoning behind most of the portfolio allocation choices." The silence that followed was profound and electric, charged with implications that slowly dawned on each family member as they realized what Elena was suggesting. Her excluded voice had been documenting their decision-making process with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that could either save them from criminal prosecution or provide evidence for their conviction. Pemberton leaned forward with sudden interest, his professional instincts recognizing the potential value of Elena's documentation despite his ignorance of the family dynamics that had created it. "Mrs. Blackwell, could you describe the nature and extent of your record-keeping regarding the family's investment decisions?" Elena opened her worn notebook to reveal pages of detailed analysis covering market conditions, risk assessments, and specific warnings about the investment strategies that had proven so disastrous. Her handwriting documented not only the decisions themselves, but the reasoning behind them, including the warning signs that the family had chosen to ignore. The notebook contained detailed tracking of semiconductor supply chain indicators, interest rate trajectory analysis, and technology sector valuation assessments that had predicted the market correction with remarkable accuracy. Elena's research had identified the specific risks that were now destroying the family portfolio, documented months before the losses began materializing. Vincent stared at his wife with new understanding as he realized that her excluded voice had been conducting exactly the kind of rigorous analysis that could demonstrate proper due diligence in investment decision-making. Her systematic documentation could prove that sophisticated research had been conducted, even if the family had chosen to ignore the results. Pemberton requested immediate access to Elena's records, recognizing that her documentation might represent their best hope for demonstrating that the investment decisions had been based on reasonable analysis rather than speculation or negligence. Her meticulous record-keeping could provide the evidentiary foundation necessary for mounting a credible defense against criminal prosecution. The irony was devastating and inescapable. The family had excluded Elena from financial decisions because she lacked formal credentials, but her unauthorized documentation was now their only hope for avoiding criminal conviction for financial negligence. Her voice had been systematically silenced, but her careful record-keeping could save them from prosecution. Theodore's voice was barely above a whisper as he realized the implications of their situation. "Elena, we need your complete cooperation with our legal defense. Your records could be essential for demonstrating that our investment decisions were based on proper analysis and reasonable market projections." The family that had spent months dismissing Elena as unqualified and uneducated was now entirely dependent on her meticulous documentation for their legal survival. Her excluded insights had become their only hope for avoiding criminal conviction and financial ruin through civil litigation. Elena closed her notebook slowly, her expression unreadable as she considered the family's desperate request for cooperation with their legal defense. The same people who had implemented policies to exclude her from financial discussions were now begging for access to the documentation that could save them from prosecution. Pemberton outlined the cooperation agreement that Elena would need to sign, granting the defense team access to her complete records while potentially requiring her testimony in criminal proceedings. Her documentation would become the centerpiece of their defense strategy, assuming that her analysis could demonstrate proper due diligence in investment decision-making. The family watched Elena with barely concealed desperation as she considered their request for cooperation, their financial and legal survival now entirely dependent on the goodwill of the woman they had spent months systematically humiliating and excluding from meaningful participation in their business discussions. Elena nodded slowly, agreeing to cooperate with their legal defense despite the months of cruel treatment she had endured. Her decision would save them from criminal prosecution, but the power dynamics in the room had shifted in ways that none of them fully understood yet. The federal courthouse on Spring Street commanded respect with its imposing marble columns and brass fixtures that spoke of institutional authority dating back generations. Elena adjusted her simple navy suit as she walked through the metal detectors, her worn notebook tucked securely under her arm, while camera crews and financial reporters gathered in the hallway outside courtroom 7A. Judge Margaret Harrison presided over the packed courtroom with 30 years of federal bench experience, her silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses reflecting the gravity of proceedings that could reshape one of the city's oldest investment families. The Blackwell wealth management scandal had attracted national attention as prosecutors sought to demonstrate how privileged incompetence had destroyed hundreds of millions in investor assets. Theodore sat at the defense table with renewed confidence, his expensive suit and commanding presence suggesting a man who expected legal vindication rather than criminal conviction. Pemberton had assured the family that Elena's cooperation would provide the documentation necessary to demonstrate proper due diligence and reasonable investment strategy, transforming their public humiliation into legal victory. Garrett and Vivian occupied seats directly behind their father, their MBA credentials and professional experience providing psychological armor against accusations that the family lacked proper financial expertise. Elena's records would prove that sophisticated analysis had supported their investment decisions, even if market conditions had prevented successful outcomes. Vincent squeezed Elena's hand as she prepared to take the witness stand, his gesture combining gratitude for her cooperation with confidence that her testimony would vindicate his family's reputation and financial competence. The prosecution's entire case relied on demonstrating professional negligence that Elena's documentation would systematically refute. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chun commanded attention as she approached the witness stand where Elena sat with composed dignity, her simple appearance contrasting sharply with the expensive legal representation surrounding the defendant's table. Chin's reputation for methodical prosecution had earned convictions against some of the financial industry's most sophisticated criminals. Chin began with routine questions about Elena's role in the Blackwell family business and her relationship to the investment decisions that had resulted in such catastrophic losses. Elena's responses were clear and measured, describing her exclusion from formal decision-making while acknowledging her detailed documentation of market conditions and portfolio strategy. The prosecutor's questions established Elena's presence during family investment meetings and her attempts to contribute analysis that had been systematically dismissed by credentialed family members. Elena's testimony painted a picture of careful observation and detailed record-keeping despite her exclusion from meaningful participation in financial planning. Chin's voice carried subtle authority as she approached the critical moment in her examination. Mrs. Blackwell, the defense has suggested that your documentation demonstrates proper due diligence in the investment decisions that resulted in such significant losses. Before we examine those records, could you describe your educational background and professional qualifications for financial analysis? Elena's response was calm and matter-of-fact, delivered without drama or emphasis despite the explosive nature of her revelation. I graduated summa cum laude from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania with a Master of Business Administration degree specializing in quantitative finance and portfolio management. The silence that followed was profound and electric, stretching across the packed courtroom like a physical presence that seemed to suspend normal breathing and heartbeat rhythms. Theodore's confident expression dissolved into confusion, then shock, as the implications of Elena's statement penetrated his consciousness with devastating clarity. Chun continued her questioning with professional composure despite the visible impact Elena's credentials had created throughout the courtroom. Mrs. Blackwell, could you elaborate on your specific areas of academic concentration and any honors or distinctions you received during your graduate studies? Elena's voice remained steady as she detailed her academic achievements with clinical precision. My concentration focused on derivatives pricing models and systematic risk assessment in international portfolio management. I graduated first in my class with highest honors and received the Dean's Award for Excellence in Quantitative Finance Research. Garrett's face had drained completely of color as he processed Elena's credentials, his own Harvard MBA, suddenly feeling inadequate against her superior academic performance at the nation's premier finance program. His condescending lectures about business education had been delivered to someone whose qualifications exceeded his own by significant margins. Chun introduced Elena's graduate thesis into evidence, a sophisticated analysis of correlation risk in leveraged real estate portfolios that had predicted exactly the kind of market correction that had destroyed the Blackwell family fortune. Elena's academic research had identified the specific vulnerabilities that their investment strategy had systematically exploited to maximize potential losses. Vivian stared at her sister-in-law with dawning horror as she realized that Elena's financial expertise far exceeded anything her boutique investment firm had ever produced. Elena's quantitative modeling capabilities represented the kind of analytical sophistication that institutional investors paid millions to access through elite consulting firms. The prosecutor continued methodically through Elena's documentation, revealing month-by-month analysis that had predicted every aspect of the market correction with mathematical precision. Elena's research had identified semiconductor supply chain vulnerabilities, interest rate trajectory risks, and technology sector valuation bubbles that professional analysts had missed entirely. Chun presented Elena's alternative investment recommendations to the court, detailed strategies that would have generated returns exceeding 300% during the same period when the Blackwell family strategy had lost over 60% of invested capital. Elena's excluded voice had possessed exactly the expertise necessary to preserve and grow the family fortune. Elena's testimony revealed that her careful warnings about correlation risk and sector rotation had been dismissed as uninformed speculation from someone who supposedly lacked proper education. Her systematic analysis had been ignored in favor of investment decisions based on business school contacts and professional networking rather than rigorous financial modeling. Theodore's composure cracked visibly as Elena described her attempts to warn the family about interest rate policy implications that would devastate their leveraged real estate strategy. Her excluded insights had identified the Federal Reserve trajectory that would trigger the correction destroying their portfolio, but educational prejudice had silenced her voice. The prosecutor introduced Elena's complete portfolio recommendations into evidence, demonstrating that her suggested allocation would have not only preserved capital during market volatility, but generated substantial returns through defensive positioning and sector rotation strategies. Her financial modeling had identified opportunities that the credentialed family members had missed entirely. Pemberton's cross-examination became increasingly desperate as he attempted to undermine Elena's credibility without questioning the obvious superiority of her analytical capabilities. His strategy dissolved under the weight of Elena's documented predictions and the mathematical precision of her market analysis. Chen's redirect examination established Elena's motivation for maintaining detailed documentation despite her systematic exclusion from family decision-making. Elena's testimony revealed her frustrated attempts to contribute expertise that could have prevented the financial disaster, silenced by family policies that prioritize credentials over actual competence. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably as spectators and media representatives processed the stunning reversal of the case narrative. The prosecution had revealed that the supposed victim of family financial negligence possessed superior qualifications and had predicted every aspect of the investment disaster that professional experts had failed to anticipate. Judge Harrison's questions to Elena demonstrated judicial recognition of her exceptional expertise and the tragedy of her systematic exclusion from decisions where her voice could have prevented catastrophic losses. Elena's composed responses highlighted the irony of educational prejudice that had silenced superior analytical capabilities. Vincent stared at his wife with expressions combining shock, admiration, and dawning shame as he realized the extent to which his family had systematically dismissed someone whose expertise exceeded their own. Elena's quiet dignity throughout months of humiliation had concealed intellectual capabilities that dwarfed their collective professional achievements. Elena's testimony concluded with devastating effectiveness as Chun established that every catastrophic investment decision had contradicted Elena's documented recommendations, while her alternative strategies would have generated substantial returns during the same market period. The prosecution had demonstrated that the family's financial disaster resulted from arrogant dismissal of superior expertise rather than unforeseeable market conditions. The revelation had completely transformed the legal proceedings from a defense of reasonable investment strategy into an exposure of systematic incompetence and educational prejudice. Elena's excluded voice had possessed exactly the expertise necessary to preserve the family fortune, but credentialed arrogance had destroyed hundreds of millions in investor assets. As Elena stepped down from the witness stand, the power dynamics in the courtroom had shifted irreversibly. The woman the Blackwell family had dismissed as an unqualified dropout had revealed herself as the most sophisticated financial analyst in the room, while their credentialed expertise had proven worthless against her superior analytical capabilities. Judge Harrison delivered her verdict with the measured authority of 3 decades on the federal bench, her words carrying the weight of legal precedent that would reshape the Blackwell family forever. The court found Theodore, Garrett, and Vivian guilty of gross financial negligence and breach of fiduciary duty, their systematic dismissal of Elena's superior expertise constituting willful ignorance that had destroyed hundreds of millions in investor assets. The criminal sentences included substantial fines and supervised probation that would prevent the family from managing investment assets without court oversight for the next 5 years. Their professional reputations lay in ruins as financial industry publications documented how educational prejudice had blinded them to analytical expertise that could have prevented their catastrophic losses. Elena sat quietly in the gallery as journalists and camera crews documented the family's humiliation, her worn notebook resting in her lap, while reporters sought comments about the stunning reversal that had transformed her from excluded victim to recognized financial expert. Her composed dignity throughout the proceedings had impressed legal observers who recognized the grace she had shown despite months of systematic humiliation. Within hours of the verdict, Elena's phone began ringing with offers from prestigious investment firms seeking to hire someone whose analytical capabilities had predicted market movements with such devastating accuracy. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Blackstone all requested meetings to discuss partnership opportunities that would utilize her quantitative modeling expertise at the institutional level. The irony was complete and brutal. The woman the Blackwell family had dismissed as an unqualified dropout was now courted by the financial industry's most elite institutions, while their own credentialed expertise had been exposed as worthless against her superior analytical capabilities. Elena's Wharton credentials and demonstrated competence commanded respect that their family name could no longer provide. Vincent found himself in the impossible position of watching his wife's professional ascension while his family name became synonymous with financial incompetence and educational prejudice. The woman he had failed to defend during months of systematic humiliation was now offered positions that exceeded anything his family connections could provide. Theodore's attempts to salvage his reputation through media interviews only deepened his humiliation as financial journalists questioned how someone with his supposed expertise could have ignored warnings from the most qualified analyst in his own family. His commanding presence had been reduced to desperate damage control that convinced no one of his continued relevance. Elena accepted a partnership position with Meridian Capital Management, one of the nation's most respected institutional investment firms. Her starting compensation package exceeded the Blackwell family's remaining liquid assets, while her performance bonuses would be tied to portfolio returns that her modeling suggested could reach 40% annually. Her first major presentation to institutional clients drew standing ovations from pension fund managers and endowment directors who recognized the sophistication of her analytical framework. Elena's systematic approach to correlation risk and sector rotation represented exactly the kind of expertise that professional investors sought during periods of market volatility and uncertainty. The financial media coverage of Elena's career transformation became a cautionary tale about the dangers of dismissing expertise based on superficial credentials rather than demonstrated competence. Her story appeared on magazine covers and financial television programs as an example of how prejudice could destroy institutional value while overlooking superior analytical capabilities. Garrett's attempts to find new employment in financial services met with systematic rejection as potential employers recognized his role in ignoring Elena's warnings about market conditions. His Harvard MBA had become a liability rather than an asset, associated with the kind of credentialed arrogance that had caused such spectacular losses. Vivian's boutique investment firm lost its remaining clients as institutional investors demanded explanations for how she had dismissed Elena's superior analysis while pursuing strategies that contradicted basic risk management principles. Her professional network abandoned her as the financial industry recognized the extent of her incompetence. Elena's new colleagues at Meridian Capital treated her with the professional respect that had been systematically denied by her own family, recognizing her analytical capabilities through collaborative research projects and strategic planning sessions. Her insights became central to the firm's investment philosophy and client advisory services. The academic recognition followed quickly as business schools invited Elena to present guest lectures about systematic risk assessment and the behavioral biases that could blind credentialed professionals to superior analytical insights. Her case study became required reading in graduate finance programs as an example of how institutional prejudice could destroy value. Theodore's legal troubles extended beyond criminal prosecution as civil litigation from investor groups sought additional damages for the systematic negligence that Elena's testimony had revealed. His remaining assets faced attachment as courts recognized that his dismissal of Elena's warnings constituted willful ignorance rather than reasonable professional judgment. Elena's first major research publication appeared in the Journal of Portfolio Management, documenting the correlation patterns that had predicted the Blackwell family's losses with mathematical precision. Her peer-reviewed analysis became the foundation for new risk assessment methodologies that institutional investors adopted to prevent similar disasters. The family's social standing collapsed as their former peers recognized the extent to which educational prejudice had blinded them to analytical excellence within their own household. Elena's professional success highlighted their systematic failure to recognize expertise that could have preserved their wealth and reputation. Vincent struggled with the transformation of his marriage as Elena's professional success exceeded anything his family name had ever provided. The woman he had failed to defend during months of systematic humiliation was now featured in financial publications as one of the industry's most insightful analysts. Elena's charitable foundation focused on providing educational opportunities for students whose financial expertise had been overlooked due to prejudice or credential bias. Her personal experience of systematic exclusion motivated programs that identified analytical talent regardless of traditional educational pathways or family connections. The investment returns under Elena's management at Meridian Capital exceeded all projections as her modeling capabilities generated consistent alpha across multiple market cycles. Her clients included the same institutional investors who had lost assets through the Blackwell family's negligent management, now benefiting from Elena's superior analytical framework. Garrett's public attempts to reconcile with Elena met with polite but firm boundaries, as she focused on professional responsibilities that utilized her expertise in environments where analytical capabilities were respected rather than dismissed. Her success highlighted the permanent consequences of the family's systematic cruelty and educational prejudice. Elena's professional speaking engagements commanded fees that exceeded the Blackwell family's annual income from their reduced circumstances, while her investment insights influenced institutional strategies managing trillions in global assets. Her systematic exclusion by credentialed family members had become a legendary example of how prejudice could blind institutions to superior expertise. The media coverage of Elena's success story resonated with audiences who had experienced similar dismissal based on credential bias rather than demonstrated competence. Her dignified response to systematic humiliation inspired professionals who faced institutional prejudice that overlooked their analytical capabilities and intellectual contributions. Vincent's attempts to rebuild his relationship with Elena required acknowledging his complicity in the systematic exclusion that had nearly destroyed her confidence while ignoring expertise that could have preserved their family fortune. His journey toward redemption demanded confronting the educational prejudice that had shaped his family's destructive decision-making patterns. Theodore's final public statement acknowledged that his dismissal of Elena's warnings had been the greatest mistake of his professional career, recognizing that credential bias had blinded him to analytical excellence that exceeded anything his formal education had provided. His admission came too late to salvage his reputation, but served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of systematic prejudice. Elena's investment philosophy emphasized careful analysis over credentialed authority, systematic research over networking relationships, and mathematical modeling over intuitive speculation. Her approach represented everything the Blackwell family had systematically ignored during their pursuit of aggressive strategies that had contradicted her superior analytical insights. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Elena had ascended from systematic exclusion to professional recognition that exceeded anything the Blackwell family name had ever commanded, while their credentialed arrogance had been exposed as worthless against her superior expertise. Justice had been served through market forces that rewarded competence while punishing the prejudice that had dismissed analytical excellence. As Elena reviewed portfolio performance reports in her corner office overlooking the financial district, she reflected on the strange journey that had led from family humiliation to professional triumph. The notebook that had documented their systematic dismissal of her warnings now rested in her desk drawer as a reminder that expertise deserved recognition regardless of its formal packaging. The Blackwell family had learned too late that credentials without competence were worthless, while competence without recognition was merely postponed rather than eliminated. Elena's patient documentation and dignified persistence had transformed systematic exclusion into ultimate vindication, proving that analytical excellence would eventually overcome institutional prejudice through the undeniable mathematics of superior results. The story resonated with anyone who had ever felt dismissed or underestimated because of others' prejudicial assumptions about their capabilities. Her triumph represented hope for everyone whose expertise had been overlooked due to credential bias or family prejudice, demonstrating that competence would ultimately be recognized through consistent performance and patient persistence. What aspects of Elena's patient response to systematic dismissal do you think might apply to challenges in your own professional or personal experiences? Share your thoughts in the comments about times when patience and preparation proved more valuable than immediate recognition.